Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin. Assalatu wassalamu ala anbiya'il mursalin. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad Fatih lima khuliq wal khatib lima sabaq nasrul haq bihaq wa hadi ila siratal mustaqim wa ala alihi haq qidaril azim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh everyone. May peace be upon you wherever you are with your family. Welcome to another online dars with Shaykh Abdul Aziz Fredericks on Sunday night. And the continuation of this blessed book, the 40 Principles of the Deen from Ihya Ulumuddin, Imam Ghazali. So tonight we continue with the title on status. So Alhamdulillah, for 4 weeks already, we've been with Shaykh Abdul Aziz, and this time we had reached Ramadan in his online dance. Ramadan Mubarak everyone, and we hope that all of you will be blessed with this online gathering. Inshallah. I think without further ado, we'll welcome Shaykh Abdul Aziz to start the class now. Inshallah. And for those of you who want to send Q&A, send to this number 906-87106. Thank you very much. Tafadhal ya Shaykh.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم وصلى اللهم على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله نستغفر الله نسألك الجنة ونعوذ بك من النار أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله نستغفر الله نسألك الجنة ونعوذ بك من النار أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله نستغفر الله نسألك الجنة ونعوذ بك من النار اللهم إنك عفو تحب العفو فاعف عنا اللهم إنك عفو تحب العفو فاعف عنا اللهم إنك عفو كريم تحب العفو فاعف عنا يا كريم العفو جزاكم الله خيرا السلام عليكم Alhamdulillah Ramadan Mubarak may Allah bless you all with this month and give you increase and ease inshallah ta'ala. So Alhamdulillah we continue with the book of 40 Al-Arba'in 40 principles of Imam al-Ghazali, which is an abridgment of the Ihya Ulumuddin, which we mentioned and we talked a little bit about its background. And we reached a point where we were talking about purifying the heart, purifying it from the damaged things that can damage it, that can harm your inner being. And we've reached the principle, the sixth principle, which in this text is translated as frivolity and love of status. I'm not really very comfortable with that word frivolity because it doesn't really do justice to the term ra'una. It does put it in brackets as frivolity, ra'una, and love of status, hubb al-jah. So I'd like to just look at that word frivolity or ra'una a little bit in a little bit more detail before we continue with the text. And the reason why is because if we can understand this particular word, probably the next 2 or 3 chapters will make a lot more sense. So apologies for being a little bit of grammarian for the next 5 minutes or so, but I think it's worth it. So you have this word ra'ana, ra'ina, or ra'una, which means to become foolish or to be foolish, to be stupid, to be insane, to be unsound in intellect or understanding or deficient, to be slack, to be lax, or to be languid. And all of these words then lead to this word frivolity. However, that translation or that dictionary definition really doesn't do it justice. And perhaps one of the best ways is to see how it's used in the classical Arabic sense and how it was used in the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then perhaps we can get an understanding of what Imam al-Ghazali intended by this particular word. So there's a line that one might say, "Rahaluha rahlatan fiha ra'an." So what this means is that the saddler, the person that puts his the saddle upon the horse, he places it on his beast. And in the saddle, there is slackness, meaning that there's some laxity in there. So it's a little bit loose. And because most of us don't have the privilege of riding horses, one might put in a modern context when you get on your bike and your bike's not quite working properly, or that it's not there's a little bit of slackness in there, or when you get in your car and you can feel there's just the engine's not quite working right. That's what's understood by ra'una. So this word frivolity doesn't quite do justice to the way that this word is used in Arabic. Perhaps an even a better understanding would be from the word, the way it's used when we say, when one says ra'anat was shams, that the sun did ra'una on him, or did ra'una to him. So this word frivolity, it relates to this, or the word translation of frivolity. What this means, if I were to translate it, means the sun rendered him relaxed, or weak, or languid, or pained him so much that he ended up in a fainting or swooning. Now that's quite an interesting way of describing this concept of ra'una, is because in the beginning it might have some benefits, that the sun makes a person relaxed, but this becoming relaxed eventually leads into pain, and eventually leads to complete collapse, and you become mar'una. So this ra'una that's referred to here, frivolity, is not, I don't think is a very good translation of what the word means, because really, if you think of that sun, it's dazzling, it's warm, and it leads to this slackness in you, and it leads to this the best way would be to perhaps to understand it for those that are in England, is that we're supposed to be taking care of this lockdown situation that we're in the UK. But when it got to the sun came out last week for a weekend, the parks were full, because everybody just kind of forgot what the whole purpose of this lockdown was about, which was saving people's lives and keeping people safe, and they just became overwhelmed. So this frivolity might be an appropriate translation. However, I would like to think of it as being a distraction. So sometimes people choose to be distracted. Sometimes people get distracted just because of the brightness of the sun. Sometimes people get distracted and dazzled, so to speak, by what leads to this ra'una, to this frivolity, or this languidness, or this slackness, or whatever way you want to translate it. So how does this relate to the text? The concept of this ra'una, this frivolity, or this slackness, or being dazzled, is because of our relationship to the temporal world around us. This world around us acts as something which leads us into a state of frivolity, if you want to use the translation of Nasir Abdul Salam, who translated the text, or the word that I didn't translate it, as maybe slackness would be the word that I would probably use. This world, this temporal world, leads us into this state of being deceived, of being slack, of being eventually overwhelmed, and us being taken into this state of swooning or fainting. So what is this thing that we talk about when we talk about the world? Because the world is all around us. In particular, there are two, what Imam al-Ghazali says are the arkan, or the pillars of the dunya, pillars of the world, and they are wealth and possessions. Sorry, wealth and status. And that's why the title says frivolity and love of status. And so the next chapter is love of wealth. And then leading from that, you have diseases related to that, are things to do with showing off because you want status, pride because you think you're better than other people, miserliness because you want to keep everything that you've got. And all of these are diseases or sicknesses of the heart, which manifest themselves in outward actions. But if you go to the root of them, it's to do with love of the dunya, love of the temporal world, love of this temporary world. And Sayyidina Yahya ibn Mu'adh, one of the early ascetics, one of the early scholars, he says, "Ad-dunya khamra iblis, man shariba minha shurbatan la yafiqa illa ala askari al-qiyamah." He says this dunya, this temporal world, is the khamr iblis, is the wine of the devil. Man shariba minha shurbatan, whoever drinks a gulp of this or drinks from this, la yafiq illa ala askar al-qiyamah. He won't wake from this state until the day of judgment, until the day of resurrection, until the Yawm al-Qiyamah means the day that you stand up from this world, from the to the next world. So here, that relates quite closely to this description of a ra'una, of frivolity, is that when you start to take it in, it can overwhelm you very quickly. Right, let's look at these two points, the hubb al-ja' wa hubb al-mal, love of the world and love of status. Now status here, the two of them are described, so to have possession or wealth, Imam al-Ghazali uses the phrase milk al-a'yan, and the translation here uses love of substance or possession of substances. I would have used just possession. The things around you, when you have them, you own them, then this is what you've got, what we would say mal, worldly gains. You've got something. But jah or status is where you don't own physical entities, or you don't have milk al-ayan, you don't get possession of actual entities. What you get possession of is people's hearts, people's feelings towards you. So what's meant by hubb al-ja' is love of, or the desire to get possession of people's hearts so that they can feel in a particular way to you. Now, if I go to the text, actually, he does a very good explanation. So I'll jump to page 150 for those that do have the text, and for those that don't, I'll just read it out. It's a good translation, a good piece of text, inshallah. So he says, the reality of status, or the reality of jah. Know that the reality of status is the possession of people's hearts, in order for the person of status to use them according to his desire, for them to rush to fulfill his needs, and for tongues to praise him. Just as the meaning of wealth is the possession of dirhams. Dirhams is just meaning money, so you could use dollars or pounds. Just as wealth is the possession of dollars and pounds in order to achieve some goal, likewise the meaning of status is the possession of hearts. And again, possession of hearts, implication here, because having somebody's heart, this possessing the emotions from somebody doesn't necessarily imply something bad, and it isn't necessarily bad. What's being implied in this is when you look to get somebody's heart so that you can manipulate it, or you can use it to your advantage, and that's what's being referred to here. And this is much more dangerous than possession of wealth, because if you can start to use people's hearts, or use people, then it's much more damaging to them and much more damaging to you than manipulating the world and stealing and things. So status is actually more dangerous than possession. So he goes on, however, status is more beloved. People would love to have status more than they would love wealth. Why? Because to achieve wealth through it is easier than achieving status through wealth. And we can see this, that to make money out of who you are, once you're powerful, once you're loved, is much easier than making people love you because you have wealth. So it's more difficult to buy people's hearts than it is to use your status to buy their wealth or to gain their wealth. And we know that from the way that people manipulate, in particular, spiritual abuse, or spiritual, abuse is probably the only way you can use it, of status. So when somebody is able to get the status because of their knowledge, or because of their spiritual height, or because of whatever they've got to manage to convince people how great they're, once they've got that, people just give them money, people give them possessions. So status is the means to getting wealth, but wealth is not necessarily the means to getting status. There are people that would love to buy their murid, so to speak, their disciples, but they can't because they just have nothing. Whereas those people that have charisma can soon use that charisma to make earn a great deal of money. I remember just as to kind of highlight that point. I was with two, I suppose, sheikhs would probably, or two. They were American converts to Islam, who had reached quite a high level of status in terms of their social skills and their communication skills, and they knew a great deal about the religion, and they used to travel around from place to place, getting donations. And I remember one of them leaving the other. And when he left him, the reason why he left him, they just traveled to the Emirates, to Dubai, and they come at that time come back with $100,000, which in the 60s was an enormous figure to get just from one donation. And they came back to the hotel after meeting this rich Arab sheikh, and the one of them turned around to the other and says, "Why do you look so sad? You know, we just got $100,000." And he says, $100,000 is nothing. How long is that going to last us? And then the other one, who became much closer to me, became a good friend of mine, decided he's going to leave him. He's going to leave this whole circus of going around collecting money based on the fact that they have status with the Arabs, or in their case, they're American Muslims who speak Arabic and promoting Islam in America. And as a result of this, he left him, because this was perhaps the first sign of the development of what would really be described as spiritual abuse. But it's abuse of not wealth, but abuse of status, jah, and power. And that's what the chapter's about. It's not necessarily about having people's hearts loving you, but it's about when you desire people to love you, and when you're able to use people's love for you to your benefit, and that you want that, and when you seek that. But we'll come into a little bit more detail about that. Let's continue with what the Imam says. So, however, status is more beloved because to achieve wealth through it is easier than achieving status through wealth, and because it is impervious to theft, usurpation, or being subject to damage. What's meant here is much more. Possessions can be hit very quickly and damaged very quickly. 1 minute you're driving your car, and then the next minute somebody just hits you, and khalas, car's gone. Car's a write-off with just a small bump. Whereas generally speaking, it takes a lot to damage your status, the way people. Once you've got somebody's heart, it's almost impossible to lose it, because even taking the example of spiritual abuse, when people know that somebody is doing bad, they will, because of the status that person has reached, or that person has gained that status, it's almost impossible to believe that person could be wrong, and therefore you defend them to extreme, and whenever so status is very difficult to damage, whereas positions are very easy to damage. Indeed, when someone owns a person's heart through that person's reverence of him, the person will not cease to praise him and look for any opportunity to support him. So that's the partway through the chapter that he describes what status is. And I wanted to read it here so we could understand what the chapter was about, because as it says, the love of frivolity and the love of status is kind of a very, I'm not quite sure it does justice to what the chapter's about. So alhamdulillah, that's what the chapter's about, inshallah. And just to point out what's meant by status, that status is where people. Let me define status. Status has two, or jah has two points to it, or the two principles. One is intishar seat. Intishar seat means basically where your reputation just spreads, where you don't need to say anything, because seat is related to word salt. Salt means when you talk, and seat is when it's almost silent. And so people talk about you either positively or negatively, and this intishar seat means where it just gets out there. So before you walk into a room, everybody knows who you are. an example of this is when I when I went to Saudi Arabia, when I went to live and work there. Alhamdulillah, I went to a school, and somehow they'd got the wrong impression of who I was, and they were anticipating this somebody coming from England. And alhamdulillah, I did come, but certainly it wasn't me that they described. And so I remember sitting talking with some of the Egyptian teachers, and then I realized this is, oh, you know, we heard there was this guy coming from England. Glad he didn't come because it sounds like he was a real horror, and he was this and he's that and he's this, he's that, and you know, he's. And after a while, I realized that they were actually describing me, because people had talked so much about me coming there. And one of the reasons was because I came as a teacher, but actually prior to that, I was the head teacher. So I'd taken a big cut in salary, a big cut in status and everything to come. And alhamdulillah, they never clicked that the person that they hated so much was the guy that they used to play football with in between lessons, and that was me. So intishara, the seat is where that reputation of who you are gets to the place before you do. Or so when you have when you have the status, it's because you have a reputation. That's one. And the other thing is istihar, is where you have fame. Actually, people start to talk about you, and both of them of course are very, very close. And the first one is mentioned in the hadith where the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, "Hasba imra'in min ash-shar an yushiru an-nas ilayhi bil asabi' fi dinihi wa dunyahu illa man asamahu Allah." He says that it's sufficient harm or sufficient evil or sufficient bad for a person where for a person when other people point towards him with their hands about his religion or his worldly status. So what it means is that people start to look at you, start to take a note of you, and in effect that you're looked at or judged simply by your outward form. So that people make judgments about, oh, he must be a Sufi because look at his beard, or he must be a this because of that. And
sorry, can I join you?
Yeah.
Sorry, guys. Assalamu alaikum, everyone.
This is welcome. I just want another. So when people judge based on your status, this is dangerous for you. Why? Because if you're good, then you think you're good. You think you start to boost yourself up not because of whether you really are good or not, but because of the way people look at you or the way this isha they point to you. Illa man asamahu Allah, except those, and this is important because not everything about status is necessarily wrong and bad, and not everything about gaining people's hearts is necessarily wrong or bad, but it is sufficient that people notice you, in a particular way, that people take note of you, that you end up being damaged inside. That's why Sufyan al-Thawri, he said he doesn't like to wear clothes which are excellent, excellently, the best clothes, nor the worst clothes. Why? Because both of them draw attention to him. One is to be anonymous, one is to be hidden. And it's interesting, there's at least two cases where I was attacked, so to speak, for my association with a lady who didn't wear hijab. One of them was my daughter, and somebody says, she's not wearing hijab properly. So started saying, how can you be seen with this girl? And the other was a lady who I'd worked closely with. Again, she was not known for wearing a scarf. So, but what was interesting, that both of these two ladies, if you ever got to know them and got to speak to them, you would actually find the reason why they didn't wear the hijab the scarf was not because they weren't practicing their deen. Both of them prayed 5 times a day, read more Quran than most women that I knew, and were very, very good in their character and very caring and excellent in their akhlaq, what we say in their character. However, they were being judged by the scarf, when in reality, if they got to know these two ladies, they will know that both of them would love to wear the scarf, but were shy of wearing the scarf because of the attention it drew to them. And in some ways, I'm not making this lesson about wearing scarves or not. What I'm trying to point out is that feeling of shyness, of not wanting to be seen, is actually what's being referred to in this chapter. That desire to be seen, that desire to be noted. Oh, did you see that guy's turban? Did you see that guy's shoes? Oh, there was a time where you in England in particular, the only way you could be identified by being with this particular Islamic group was if you wore very short trousers just above your knees, just below your knees, sorry, and you wore Michael Jordan basketball boots, and they based this on their misinterpretation of a hadith where the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that which is below the ankle, meaning your clothes when it's below the ankle, is in the fire. So for this reason, what they do is they wear trousers which are way above their ankles, so high that they're actually above their knee, just below their knee. And then they go around telling everybody else that they're going to the fire, that you're no good and you're no good and you're no good and you're going to the fire. They just dish out free passes to Jahannam, to the hellfire, when actually they got it completely wrong, because the hadith that they're referring to was actually referring to somebody who had a long gown, like a wedding kind of gown, a robe, a gown at the back with a trail. And the Prophet ﷺ says, that which is beyond the ankle is in the fire, meaning this person is clearly showing off with his wealth and with his status, and drawing attention to himself by the clothes that he's wearing. So these people have got it completely wrong. They wear trousers, make judgments about other people, and then they wear the most expensive baseball boots, which are associated with Michael Jordan, who was admittedly an absolutely genius when it came to basketball, but he's not our role model. And so in terms of our akhlaq, in terms of our character, so their inner character was rotten because of what they misunderstood about this hadith, when in reality the hadith, the statement of the Prophet ﷺ was actually about them seeking status, about us seeking status through our dress. And that's why in another narration of the hadith that I just mentioned about people pointing at you, one of the hadith continued, the one that's found in Sahih Muslim, it says, Allah la yanzuru ila surakum wa la ajsadikum walakin la yanzuru ila qulubikum wa a'malikum. He says, don't worry about people pointing to you or looking at you. Rather, you should be aware that God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, looks at you and he doesn't see your clothes. He doesn't see your outward form, but he looks to your heart and your actions. So that's what the chapter is really about. And perhaps even if we don't get very far with the chapter, just hopefully that introduction might give us a sufficient understanding of what the chapter deals with, inshallah. So continuing, let's read a little bit from the text. It says, قال الله عز وجل, God Almighty and Majestic says, تلك الدار الآخرة آخرة نجعلها للذين لا يريدون علوا في الأرض ولا فسادا. It says, that is the abode of the afterlife. We have made it for those who want neither high status nor corruption on earth. So here, this is thing that's being mentioned here is twofold. That al-ulu fi dunya, and the ulu fi dunya is the high status, or wanting to have status. And the second point is fasad. Fasad, let me think. Fasad, when something has fasad, you have milk, and you leave it in the sun. Going back to the analogy of the sun that we used earlier, you leave it in the sun for long enough, it becomes mufsid. Fasada takes place. The sun spoils the fresh milk. Why? Because it becomes fasid. It becomes spoiled. So here, fasada and ulu, this desire to spoil things and the desire to have a status will prevent the person from entering to the garden. Why? Because tilka dar al-akhirah, meaning the garden, the next world, the afterlife, the afterlife, this will be for those who don't want these two qualities, who don't want status, and they don't want to spoil things. Apologies for going back to my friends with the Michael Jordan basketball boots, but their intention, and the reason why I have so much disdain for them was because of the damage that they caused to people when I was living in London, and they then set the precedent for groups like ISIS and these awful organizations. The reason they dressed like this was because out of pure hatred for their own parents and their own community, that their parents, and this was very popular among the poorest groups of Muslim community, the poor Bangladeshi community, who came and they were working in some of the most difficult conditions when they first came, and now their children had raised to the status that they'd gone to university and they'd somehow learnt a better kind of Islam than their parents had, because their parents had spent all their time working in restaurants in Soho, where alhamdulillah they built the first mosque. So they used to criticize the older generation because they didn't understand their Islam well enough. For example, the hadith about the long trousers. So the proof of them knowing their Islam better is that they had short trousers. Now, why did they do this? Was because they wanted ulu. They wanted people to have respect them for how great they were, including their own parents and their own community. And then they would go into the mosque with their big boots on and say, it's not sunnah to take your shoes off. It's not sunnah to do this. You people are all backward. And so they'd go there and they'll pray in a strange, Allah, they pray with their hands, because apparently there's some hadith where they are misunderstood. This is how you pray. But the whole thing was not about whether their hadith was correct or not, but was this feeling of the desire to have ulu, this heightened status. And whenever you have this, you should remember this verse, which the chapter begins with, tilka dar al-akhirah, this, the next world, the hereafter, this is for those who la yuriduna ulu, wala ulu fil ard, wala fasada. And they don't want to spoil things. They didn't want to destroy our community. Those are the people, those humble older generation, our parents, they're the ones who will get the garden. And there's some specific, in fact, I think I'll just jump to those hadith now if I can find them, where the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says, Qala sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Ala adallakum ala ahli jannah, should I teach you about should I indicate to you who the people of the garden are? Kullu da'ifin mutada'if. It's those weak people who are considered by others to be insignificant. Lo aqsama ala Allah la abarrahum. If they were to swear something by God, that, for example, they say, Wallahi, such and such will happen, or they make dua by Allah, Allah would answer them immediately. Why? Because Allah loves them. Why does He love them? Because of their humility. Wa ahlan nar, as for the people of fire, kullu mustakbirin jawath. Who is this? Those that have got this pride, and they're stingy in what Allah has given them. So Allah gives them things, but they don't want to share it. And these are the two qualities. And so when it talks about these qualities of ulu, it's quite clear what's meant in the verse is that if you want to have that if you have that characteristic, you should be really, really careful. So what does ulu fi dunya? One of the definitions that you find in the tafsir, and I think this is Abu Abdurrahman al-Sulami in his tafsir, he says, an atawaham, that you fancy or you imagine that you are better than somebody else. Let me say that again. An atawaham ala al-basit ahadan huwa sharrun minka, that you can look at somebody or you feel about somebody, I'm better than him. That's simply it. If you start to think that you're better than other people, khalas, you have ulu. Let's read the verse again. Tilka dar al-akhirah naj'alaha lilladhina la yuriduna ulu. These are the people that don't have the ulu, don't have this. And that's really important, because once you have this in your heart, it's destroyed. And if you can get rid of that, you will see how really this is the beginning of spirituality. When you start looking at people with contempt and you start looking at them that they are better than you, you'll see how many great things will happen to you. And I'll just tell a story about one of the greatest of the greatest of the saints, so to speak, was a man called Abu Bakr al-Aydrus. I think the people of the Nusantara will know the name at least. But his father was called Al-Aydrus al-Akbar, the great Aydrus, and Sayyidina Abu Bakr was the child. Yes, yeah. Anyway, so the father said to the child, "You want to travel this path? You want to come? You want to be like me, basically. You want to be a spiritual master?" He says, "Of course I do." He says, "Okay, the first task you have to do is you have to go out and find somebody who is worse than you are, so that you can teach them." He says, "Okay, that's easy." So he goes out from the mosque or the house of Al-Aydrus, Al-Akbar, the bigger Aydrus, and he says, "I know what the worst place, according to the hadith, is the marketplace." So he goes to the market to look for some bad people. And he looks around and he can't find anybody because all the people are busy trading and doing things. He can't find anybody doing anything so he thinks, no, this is not good enough. So he goes and hears about and then he goes from place to place and he goes looking everywhere he goes. He can't find anybody who's worse than him. So he comes home and on the way back, he's like really disappointed. He's thinking, my dad's going to kill me. He sent me out to do a task and I can't. And then he sees a dog and he says, yeah, he didn't say it has to be a human. He just says, find someone who is worse than you. So he brings this dog and he thinks, my dad's going to be pleased with me. He gets to the door of his house and he looks at the dog and then he thinks, Yawm al-Qiyamah, on the day of judgment, all of the animals are going to be raised, and then any differences between them, any injustices that took place, Allah will say this was unjust, this animal killed this animal, or whatever injustice took place, and then they will return to the ground as dust. Why? Because they're not really injustices. And then the people, human beings, will say, Ya laytani kuntu turaba. They'll say, oh, how I wish that I could be like those animals, that they just they don't get punishment. So he looks at the dog and he thinks, on day of judgment, you're going to be okay. There's no guarantee that I'm going to be okay. I'm not even better than the dog. So he lets the dog go and he goes to his dad and says, I failed. And then his father says, Khalas, you've now passed the test. Because if you came back with somebody, basically if you came back and said, I'm better than him, then he doesn't want to. So the first test in understanding the path was to be able to look at other people with the eye of respect and love, and not with the eye of contempt. And that's why Ibn Ata, he says, when he comments on this verse, he says, Al-ulu is another ila nafs. Al-ulu, the first part of this is, what does he say? We have made it for those who want high status. What does high status mean? Is when you look at yourself and you keep thinking, yeah, Abdul Aziz, yeah, me, yeah, I did this, I did that, I did this, I. The ego, once you have that, that's what ulu means. Well, fasad is where you look ila dunya, to the world. I want this, I want that, I want this, I want that. So the verse, he understands it to be tilka dar al-akhirah naj'alaha lilladhina la yuriduna ulu fil ard wala fasada, meaning they don't want the dunya and they don't put status to their own nafs. So that's the first verse, and to be honest, if we understood that and nothing more, then alhamdulillah, I think the chapter would be clear. But inshallah, we'll read a little further. The Prophet said, love of wealth and status grows hypocrisy in the heart like water grows plants. So once you've got this in your heart, once you've got this hubb al-jah, this love of the wal-mal, love of the possessions and love of status, that you want to gain people's hearts, you want to gain wealth. Once you've got this in your heart, in your own heart, yumbit al-nifaq fil qalb, it will lead to hypocrisy. Kama yumbit al-ma' al-baqal, as the water grows plants. He also said love of wealth and status is more ruinous to a Muslim's religion than vicious wolves in a stable of sheep. Actually, what there's several narrations, and the narration, the Arabic text that I have is different, slightly different. It's as if it says ursila, that they've actually been sent. So it's more dangerous than two wolves that have deliberately been picked to hunt down your flock of sheep. So it's like it implies this deliberate action. And another narration, which is not the one that I have in the Arabic or the English, which is found in a different hadith, it mentions not love of the dunya, but hirs. Hirs means like protecting and passionate desire for. That's what's referred to in here. And why is that dangerous? Is because once you've got that opens up the door to everything else. Because once you want somebody's heart, once you want them to once you have an ability to gain people's hearts, you're going to start to manipulate it. You're going to start to do things. Once you've got the ability to gain possessions, or you want to gain possessions, it will open up the door to corruption, to all kinds of things. So it will just grow hypocrisy. And of course, it's more specific to the religious context here. I think I will jump there. In fact, I think I will leave that there for a moment, because it is a long chapter. And I just wanted to point out a couple of potential difficulties in understanding this. One is, first of all, does that imply that all status is bad? Because if you look around you, there's some really great people who possess people's hearts, and of course the prophets, all of them had status. So if the prophets and the saints and the great ones all had status, it can't be all that bad, can it? That's the first thing. And the second I struggle a little bit with in a personal context, because this idea of people's hearts is really quite important in the work that I do, both professionally and in terms of my voluntary religious work. In the religious work, it's very important because no one has ever become Muslim through my lectures or my way of doing things because of intellectual arguments. It just doesn't happen. Alhamdulillah, many people have become Muslim, but they've always taken Islam because of something else, not because of an intellectual argument, but usually because, I'll give you an example. There was somebody became Muslim, and I had no idea why or how originally, but one day he just came. I lived in the basement flat in London, and in the middle of the night he just came banging on my door. He says, bang, bang, open the door. He says, I have to become Muslim. I have to become Muslim. Make me Muslim. Make me Muslim now. You have to make me Muslim now. I'm thinking, who are you? I don't know if I've ever met you in my life, but and it's dark, it's middle of the night, and okay, but come in anyway. It's quite obvious he's distressed. So he started talking, and you've got to be Muslim. I've got to be Muslim. My wife is pregnant. Okay, let's slow down. My wife is pregnant, and my child, I have to make sure that my child goes to heaven. And the only way I can make sure my child goes to heaven is if he's Muslim. And if he can't be Muslim if I'm not Muslim, and his mom's not Muslim, so make me Muslim. I had no idea who this man was. Please, we talked and I calmed him down. Alhamdulillah. I says, look, don't rush into things, because I'm not sure you fully understand what you're saying, what you're doing, and just calm down, and maybe we come back tomorrow, we'll have a cup of tea and we'll just talk whatever's going on in your life, it's going to be fine. Alhamdulillah. And then I just tried to work out who he was. What had happened was that on one occasion, alhamdulillah, generally speaking, I take the underground. buses and public transport. I didn't have a car, so I had to take my bike or public transport. But on some occasions where I wear a full turban and a thobe, and if I'm going to some specific gathering, I don't usually like to take the train. So on one of these occasions, I'd taken a taxi, and he was my taxi driver. And somehow we got talking and then he'd remembered our address, obviously, because he picked me up there. And he decided that he was going to become Muslim because he wanted to connect to that man that got in his taxi, and he came banging on my door, and I don't know what I did. So it's not in my field, so to speak, of teaching people. People's hearts are much more important than their brains. And what I say is much more important that it comes from my heart to their hearts than it is from my study, so to speak, to their intellectual minds, because in my experience, that's not what people want. So here, if the definition of jah is getting people's hearts, then I'm in big trouble, because that's what makes dawah. And likewise, in my job, my day job, so to speak, of working with young people, a lot of the kids that I work with have suffered because of status, that they have so little self-esteem, so little self-respect, because it's been beaten out of them from very, very young. And they can't learn because they can't feel positive. They're emotionally damaged. And a lot of the emotionally damaged kids, a lot of what you need to do is just build their self-esteem, build a relationship with them where they can learn to love you and to trust you. And I think I mentioned previously about one particular lad who was described as being one of the most violent children that the head teacher had ever met before he'd been expelled and ended up in my school. And every single day he used to come to my office and say to his teacher, "Can I go and see Mr. Ahmed, please?" And normally people don't say, "Can I go see the head teacher?" But he every day used to say, "Can I go see Mr. Ahmed?" And every single day he would come into my office, knock on the door, see if I'm busy, say, "Mr. Ahmed, can I have a hug, please?" "Of course you can." Gave him a hug, and off he went back to class. And on some occasion he'd come two times a day. And those are the days I know he was struggling, and his teacher knew he was struggling. The fact that he came to my office every single day to hug me was based on the fact that there was something between our hearts. So here, the question is, am I going to go to the hellfire because I'm looking for status? And I'm hoping the answer is no. And I'm hoping that the answer to this whole point is that first of all, what's hopefully what's been meant here, and I'll read from Al-Ghazali. He says, Al-Madhmum, it says, فَأَيِّ شَهْرٍ تَزِيدَ عَلَى شَهْرِ الْأَنْبِيَاءِ. It says, how can the fame of the prophets and the companions, nothing is greater than those. So that's something we should be aspiring to. So how can you say, so how can you say that they're not there, that they're going against this principle of not wanting status? Or his answer is فَعْلَمْ أَنَّ الْمَذْمُومَ طَلَبَ الشَّهْرَةِ. That what's wrong is seeking fame, seeking status, seeking people's hearts. And I would add to that, or expand on that, that in the same way that gaining wealth requires intention. What do you go to work for? But also it's how you actually physically gain the wealth. And finally, what you do with that wealth once you've got it. They're the three things that are kind of crucial to the process of gaining wealth. Likewise, the process of gaining people's hearts, there are intentions. Why do I want the damaged kids in my school to love me and to love themselves, and for me to show love to them so that they can start to build up this self-respect? Why? Because I want them to be healthy emotionally. So hopefully my intention is not about I want possession of their hearts so I can manipulate them. The second is, what is my methodology in getting that? How do I actually do that? And the lad wants a hug. my understanding is that he needs a hug, give him a hug. I could turn around and say, actually, according to child protection procedures and the safeguarding procedures of North Lanarkshire Council, maybe giving you a hug is not appropriate. Let me just give you a high five. Well, I don't. I think what he needed was a hug. That's why he asked for one. So here, the method of working with people, the way that you interact with people, will define whether it's harmful. And finally, what do you do with that status? Is that when somebody loves you, how do you use or benefit or contribute to that? And going back to the spiritual abusers that I was referring to earlier, first of all, they may have started with good intention, but certainly their intention became changed on the way, and perhaps they didn't start with good intention. Second, the means of gaining people's hearts was not always right. Is that sometimes people would use manipulative tricks to get people to follow them. And the final thing is, what did they do once they got their status? Is that they used them to abuse people. And that's at one extreme, but likewise that can happen at different levels in a family. For example, can you manipulate your position of power in your relationship with your children, for example? Can you manipulate your power in your relationship with people? Do you actually have an understanding of ulu? Do you think you're better than everybody else? Because if you didn't think you were better, then even if people loved you, you wouldn't manipulate it. So how do we deal with this? And perhaps the chapter is a long chapter, and perhaps if you want, you can go back to, but just on those 3 points of intention and the means and what you do with it, maybe one of the things that's mentioned later in the book is, of course, going back, checking your intention. Why? What do you want from a thing? What do you want from the actions that you're doing? What do you want from this relationship? And continually doing what we call in Arabic muraqaba, checking the intention, reassessing your intentions all the time. The second is how do you actually deal with people? Do you put the emphasis on them, or do you put the emphasis on yourself? What did ulu mean according to Ibn Atta? It's where you look to yourself. And when the relationship is about you and not about the other person, then you're probably moving into the wanting status. Whereas if the thing is about them, and to be honest, if you like me or don't like me, I don't really care. I still like you. I still love you, and I still want the best for you. And that's important, because when you're going to the to discussion of da'wah, calling people to the deen, calling people to God, if you don't like the person that you're calling, they will know. But if you love them, despite whatever, and you respect them and look up to them, then you'll see that what you say will have meaning. But if you have contempt for them, you will know, they will know that. And alhamdulillah, like I say, no one ever became Muslim through me saying clever stuff, but perhaps people became Muslim through me loving them. And that's what this concept is about. What do you actually feel? What is the relationship about? What do you want in the dawah? Do you want people to become Muslim because you want them to be, I've got all these people around me? Or do you want them to be saved from the fire? One of the best examples is our own teacher, Habib Umar bin Muhammad bin Salim bin Hafiz, may Allah preserve him. His father was murdered when he was a young boy in Tarim, in the Yemen. And many years later, the murderer of his father repented and came to him to ask for forgiveness. And people around him wanted to protect Habib Umar from, so there was a bit of a buffer between them. Habib Umar says, no, if he wants, we must welcome him. And he was following the example of his great-grandfather, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, whose own uncle, the beloved uncle and brother as well, through rida'a, through milk, nurse brother. So that they said the same nurse mothers, and very, very beloved to him, was killed by Wahshi, a hired slave who was hired to kill him. There was an exchange that went on for some time where he asked him to be, and he continued to call him to the deen, despite the fact that he killed his most beloved relative, one of his most beloved relatives. So where the love is for the person and not for you, when you're in this for the other person, not for your own status, then you'll see. And you'll know that when alhamdulillah, also part of my job is as a officer to inspect. So I'm basically an inspector as well. One of the things that you can see teachers, when a teacher has empathy for a child, you know they're good teachers. When I go into a classroom and I look at a teacher and I know this teacher really cares for this person, and the feeling for the person is more important than the knowledge that they're communicating, then I'll say that's a good teacher. That's a good teacher, and I'll start to almost immediately know what I should be looking for in there. And when a person doesn't have that, I know this is a useless teacher. They may have some technical skills, but in terms of communication, and that's what's being referred to in here in terms of gaining people's hearts. And then probably the most important is, what do you do with praise? And that's what a lot of this chapter is, because the definition of al-jah, or according to Ghazali, is among the motivations for seeking status is the love of praise. So the jah, or this love of status, is to do with being praised. So you go out to seek praise, and dealing with praise is one of the things that the chapter tells us about, is that if when somebody praises you, you behave in a particular way, then you're probably leaning towards this poor quality, this negative quality. And if it doesn't, then it's another way. And that's what, perhaps if we get an opportunity to talk about the same chapter, continue the chapter next week, inshallah, we will do. But at that, I'm going to stop, because I know it's late in Singapore, and it's for those in the UK where it's still got many hours of fasting to go. So perhaps we're tight. So I'm going to stop there. And if we want to continue the chapter further, we can go into further detail next week. And with that, I'll hand back to Khalid for some questions.
Inshallah, Shaykh. Thank you very much, Shaykh. That's such an important lesson for us to learn today. And I think many of us going to a certain complexity in understanding that also. And we have few questions, alhamdulillah, to learn from it, and actually it's very important relating to what you have taught us when it comes to fame or status. The first question, Shaykh, you mentioned about not seeking fame, but I heard of a Western African Shaykh, Sufi Shaykh, from the Tijaniya Tariqah, Shaykh Ibrahim Nias. He said, whoever seeks fame is a slave of fame. In the same manner, he also said, whoever loves being unknown is a slave of concealment. But whoever does not desire anything except what Allah desires for him or her, that is the true servant of Allah. So the question is, how do you reach a state where you are neither seeking fame nor reject it, fear of falling in love with it? But how do you get to a state where you don't even need to reject fame because you only see everything is from Allah to Allah?
Right. In Arabic we say hada kalam. This is very high. This is a very high concept, a very high word.
Okay.
Bringing it back down to my base level, and to relate it to what was said last week about contentment, is as a principle, the concept of what he refers to as humul, concealment, and that's a very good translation, concealment, is that concealment is where people don't know you. And concealment is to do with sincerity. And sincerity, an example of a test for your concealment. Somebody came to Imam al-Haddad and asked him, I'd like to build a mosque. He says, why? He says, because there's many hadith that whoever builds a mosque in this world will have 10 palaces in the garden. He says, but why? He says, no, I want to get this reward. So what, you want palaces in the garden? Yeah, I want. So he was really quite skeptical of this person. And he was like, kind of, no, don't build a mosque, don't give money to a mosque. And then he said, okay, I'll accept the money. On condition that when I build the mosque, I will name it after your neighbor. So the mosque will be there. The mosque of Abdul Aziz, when actually it was Abdul Rahman that gave the money. And how would you feel about this? Would you be happy? And he says, no, I don't think I'll be happy. He says, don't give me any money. Because concealment is where, if you want to be shown, if you want your name to be known, then you're not really sincere in what you're doing. So, but what Shaykh Niaz is saying is, if you become famous without wanting it, and you can no longer conceal it, then don't reject it. As long as in the beginning, when what you were seeking was not fame, and that's why Imam Ghazali says it's not the fame that is dangerous, it's the seeking the fame that's dangerous. If you become famous, then khalas. And like going back to those very practical examples that I talked about, should I not say, well, actually, I'm really bad. I feel bad that guy became Muslim. What should I say? Of course I shouldn't. I should be really quite, actually, that's pretty cool. Allah didn't conceal me. Allah didn't conceal. I didn't go out to convert him to Islam. I didn't go out to do anything. But on the path, Allah opened something between our hearts, and I was no longer concealed. It was public. And likewise, that when people turn to you and come to you, and alhamdulillah, many people in strange situations have come and it's been known, you become known. That doesn't mean that you should necessarily shun it away, although some people still feel that that's necessary. If it happens and people know you, then it's okay. And I'm one of the best examples to explain what Shaykh Niazi is referring to is somebody that you know very well in Singapore, Maulana Afifuddin al-Jailani, who is extremely famous. Alhamdulillah, I love him anyway, and he has contacts. You know, he knows people. There's one occasion he called me to come to Malaysia. He says, I need you to come on Saturday. I says, Maulana, I'm working Friday and I'm working on Monday. He says, yeah, you're not working on Saturday though. I says, Maulana, it's a long way. He says, oh, what time do you finish work on Friday? I says, 4 o'clock. You sleep on the plane. I'm thinking, Maulana. And then because this is a big thing. He says, you can come, you sleep on the plane back. So he wanted me to come from London, from Glasgow, to Kuala Lumpur on a Friday night, so I could be there on a Saturday and fly back on Sunday, and then go straight back to work on Monday. Alhamdulillah, I did it. Samina wa ta'ala. Labbaik ya Habib. What did he want? He wanted me to meet Dr. Abdullah Badawi, former Prime Minister, and a couple of other important people. Then I flew back. I'm thinking, he's in this circle of people who, and wherever he goes, you know, presidents and kings and people that they love and respect him. Now, is that fame? Should he shun this? No. The thing about Shaykh Maulana Afifuddin is I've been with him when he's with my little guy over there, the baby, my son. I've seen him when he's talking to bus drivers. When I've seen him when he's just with one-to-one joking with somebody in a service station. He's exactly the same in a service station in Sweden as he is with 25,000 people in a mosque in Singapore, or when he's sitting, and I've been in all of these, or when he's sitting with the president of Sri Lanka. I've been in all of those companies with him. He's exactly the same man. There is no difference between Maulana Afifuddin there, Maulana Afifuddin there. And that's what, and why is that? It's because his intention is so pure that if Allah makes the whole world know him, so that's fine. That's what I think Shaykh Niazi is referring to, and Allah knows best. Like I said, I had a kalam.
MashaAllah, Shaykh, it's very profound detail by you. MashaAllah, we learn from it. Thank you for it. Shaykh, another question is, there are few similar questions. I try to rephrase. And this is pertaining to your question on spiritual abuse. You mentioned spiritual abuse. There are quite a number who said, relate to it. So the question is, how far can we consider a spiritual abuse is the limit? You get what I'm trying to say, Sheikh? Like, that's it. Because quite a number of people, when the moment they hear you talk about spiritual views, I think they quickly send the question, and it's important because it affects people mental state and uh, their opinion on tasawwuf also and all that. So the question is, to what extent that we have to endure spiritual abuse, and what exactly is the reality of spiritual abuse as a total? Because different people give different example, and one of them even said like, I have a friend who is very knowledgeable, know hadith, know Quran very well, even know the knowledge of God in higher esteem, like what you're saying about that. And but at the same time, and sometimes I don't listen to what he said, he tend to bully me. He tend to be hard on me. So what's your saying about this, your advice?
There, there's a difference between what we would call tarbiyah or training and abuse. Um, I used to work in a Muslim school many years ago, and one of the questions that we had to ask the parents was, how do you discipline your children? And this time I was not the a teacher or principal. I was just like a deputy, so I had to follow the procedure. And this was one of the questions I had to ask. And I hated doing this thing, but one of the questions was, how do you discipline your children? And there was this one very wonderful man, or West Indian guy, who'd become Muslim. He said, lovingly. So the question was, and I thought, 10 out of 10, this is the best answer I've got. Everyone else on the panel had said 0. The child didn't get into the school. And the reason was because the concept of loving discipline was just so foreign to them. Now, if you look at the way the Prophet ﷺ dealt with people, he dealt with them according to their intellect, according to their needs, and according to the way they would respond to things. And there was an occasion where the Prophet ﷺ noticed somebody was wearing clothes dyed in a particular plant, with a particular plant which was not permitted. And rather than say, by the way, this is haram, what he did, he said to somebody else to tell that person quietly that it would be better that he didn't wear that. So he didn't hurt the person's feeling, deliberately chose to be as gentle and subtle as possible. There was an occasion where Sayyidina Ali ibn Abi Talib, karamallahu wajha, his cousin, came in, and he was wearing something which was not. And he turned to Sayyidina Ali and says, why are you wearing your mother's clothes? And he says, should I burn it, Ya Rasulullah? He says, yes. So he went, and then Sayyidina Ali just came back, wore something different and came back. Now, one might think that that was abuse, but it wasn't abuse if you take it in the big picture of how the Prophet ﷺ used to deal with people. And so when somebody, when a teacher can appear harsh, lovingly harsh, then there's a difference between that and abuse. And I'll give you an example. Another one of my teachers, a man called Sayyid Abdul bin Abu Bakr bin Salim, who affectionately is known as Winnie Baraka in East Africa. There was one occasion he said he almost had a nervous breakdown, or maybe that's a bit strong, but he said he was really, really disturbed because he'd spoken to his teacher, Habib Ahmed Mashur al-Haddad, and Al-Habib had not smiled. Or when he looked at him, he'd look back and he'd answer. He wasn't rude. He just didn't get that loving smile that you expect from Habib Ahmed Mashur 24 hours a day. And on this one occasion, Sayyid Umar Abdullah said it almost destroyed him because he couldn't cope with not being smiled at. And he felt he was being taught something. And the reason why was because the level of love that's given. Now, if a Shaykh has that level of love, he has a responsibility not to hurt people's feelings and to make sure that he's aware. And so in his tarbiyah, and the way that he teaches them and guides them, he's got to be loving and he's got to be appropriate. And that's tarbiyah. So if you've got a Shaykh like that, then part of the question was, how far should I bear his. So if that Shaykh comes to me, and if Maulana Afifuddin says, he smiles, he laughs, and he says, you don't work on a Saturday. I just following the, you don't work on a Saturday. What? You're gonna make me take a 20-hour journey from 4 o'clock? I work until 4. I take the 5 o'clock flight and then fly for 20 hours to Singapore, to Malaysia for one meeting, and then take a 20-hour flight back so I can be back at time at 8 o'clock and go straight to work. And he says, yes, please. Now that's not abuse. That's loving care. And he asked me, and if he asked me to leave my job, I would do it. But he didn't. He asked me, and the fact that he asked me, I take as an honor. That's not abuse. That's to do with part of his tarbiyah, that if there's a benefit, I don't know what the benefit was going to be, but he asked me to do it, so I listened. Now, abuse is where people bully people. They manipulate, they use that power to do things to hurt people. And that is not acceptable. Alhamdulillah, it's rare, I hope, but it can happen. And anybody that has any responsibility spiritually for somebody else has to be aware of the effect of their words on the people that they because it might be that they just make a joke, but they break somebody's heart in it. That's because of love. So they need to know that people love you, and as a result, you need to love them back, and you need to be careful. And if you don't have a shaykh like that, then perhaps you not that tasawwuf is wrong, perhaps that particular shaykh is not the right person for you. And
But how
all I
about
can
you?
say-
But how what about, like last week you mentioned about you cut off a friend who hard on you, right? Remember? So in this particular case where again, it goes back to the sectarian Sufi thing, like, your friend is hard on you because you are not on the same frequency as them. So is it okay to just cut it out?
if somebody is abusing you, you should leave that relationship. If somebody's that it's not specific to spiritual abuse. If a sheikh is abusing you in any way, physically, mentally, spiritually, financially, then you shouldn't be in that relationship with that sheikh. If a husband is abusing you physically, mentally, spiritually, you shouldn't be in that relationship. If a wife, if a child, if a teacher, it's fairly straightforward. But when it comes to the spiritual matters, this is what the chapter's about, because it's about possession of people's hearts. And when a spiritual master gets the possession of somebody's heart, they have a greater responsibility. And if it just happens that Allah puts, and it's true that Allah puts love in people's hearts. I've seen Habib Ahmed Mashur, my own teacher, people become Muslim not because they just look at him and say, I want to become Muslim. Allah just puts love in their hearts. Now that level of power is enormous. It's phenomenal. And likewise, anyone that has even a portion of that has to know the responsibility. And if you've invested that relationship, you also have responsibility, because that's what I was talking about. The children is that they need to build that relationship up, but they also need to know that there's dangers in that. And some of those kids, especially the girls in another situation, they needed to build relationships, but there was lots of other dangers in them seeking those relationships. So taking that analogy of the spiritual Sufi master, so to speak, or spiritual abuse, is that you have responsibility as well as the sheikh having responsibility. If you go into that responsibility and you allow them to abuse you, then you have to be careful about whether you made the right decision, and perhaps change that decision. Sarah's just perhaps I need to draw a list of signs of abuse, but
MashaAllah. MashaAllah. Shaykh, another question that is I try to rephrase quite numbers, quite similar, is also enduring humiliation. For example, when someone humiliates you, saying that, oh, you don't have this knowledge, or backbite about you, like saying that you're not good enough in the work that you do, or religious knowledge, whatever that pertaining in, I think it's common in any religious circle or any circles. So how do we deal with it when we feel hurt? Does that mean that we have the love of status? If we feel hurt, what people said, the bad things about us, and how should we respond to it?
Good. That's a really very good question, because the definition, or how you can identify the nafs, the ego, in Arabic, the nafs, the ego, is that which feels praise and feels happy with praise, and feels hurt with the opposite of praise.
Criticism,
Criticism.
humiliation.
So criticism. So when you feel that the thing inside you that feels happy with praise is your nafs. So if you want to know what your nafs is, that's it. So somebody pushes your nafs, or when you're praised or when you're criticized. But within the chapter, perhaps if we do continue with the chapter, one of the things about is, how do you deal with praise, and likewise, how do you deal with criticism? If somebody praises you and the praise you recognize is not from you, for example, if somebody says, if you can recognize in the praise that what's being praised is a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And for example, when somebody says, you've been blessed with a beautiful voice. Okay? So if the praise is that you've been blessed with a beautiful voice, or you understand that what's being said is that you have been blessed with a beautiful, and you recognize that it's a blessing from someone else, meaning God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then that's not going to damage you as much as, oh, you got a great voice. So when somebody says you've got a great voice, but you understand the meaning of that was you have been blessed with a great voice, but then you're kind of protecting yourself. So when it comes to praise, you should look at, that's one of the elements of recognizing how to deal with praise, is that you always make sure you attribute it to others, that, oh, you're looking quite smart today, because I'm my top. You put the, you recognize that, you take it away from. So that's one of the ways of dealing with. But when it comes to criticism, you look a little bit at what's being meant, and look, what is there I can learn from this criticism? Is it just, for example, I think the example that was given last week was where people put you down. That if they put you down for the sake of putting you down, then that's not criticism. And I'll give you an example of once I was in a class, and the teacher was saying that Al-Habib Ahmed bin Hassan, who was the great grandfather of Al-Habib Hassan, so he's Hassan bin Muhammad bin Salim bin Ahmed bin Hassan, his great grandfather Ahmed bin Hassan, he memorized a poem called Al-Alfiya, the grammar book, a poem about grammar. And I thought, I'm actually studying that poem. It's not that difficult to memorize. So in the lesson, he'd mentioned, that Ahmed bin Hassan memorized this poem. So then I started memorizing it. At the same time, I was also memorizing Quran. And the teacher later said, why are you memorizing Quran and poetry at the same time? Which is more important? Who do you think you are? Ahmed bin Hassan? Now I look at obviously I was kind of hurt. But why am I hurt? Actually, he's right. There is a lesson in that. Al-Habib Ahmed bin Hassan had memorized Al-Alfiya after he'd memorized the Quran, not while memorizing the Quran. So the criticism was, I looked at, what can I learn from this? What can I learn from this? And other people often they just say, oh, you're pretty ugly. What criticism can I get from that? What can I learn from that? Well, actually, this is the way I look. I can't do anything about that. Maybe I can trim my beard after this lockdown beard. But what can I learn from this? is I can learn that person just doesn't like me. So when you're being criticized, how do you deal with criticism? You look at what can I learn from this? And sometimes what I learn is this person has got bad feeling towards me and I need to leave this relationship. And other times it's, that's actually a valid point. What can I learn? Or it might be a mixture of the two. There's actually a valid point being made in a very nasty way. So let me work out what the nasty bit is and what the valid bit is. And that ability to dissect that criticism will help you inside you deal with the criticism, and that will help you with what we said, the nafs. You'll help you understand the nafs by being able to analyze, and it will help you deal with people, inshallah.
MashaAllah. Thank you, Shaykh, for that beautiful and beautiful advice and lots of wisdom. I think we come to the last question, and I've been receiving quite a number of questions, but not relevant to this topic. So I felt like we can answer with Shaykh other times if he has the time, inshallah. And but right now we need to focus on the topic specifically, and I think Shaykh also will be, need to rest and prepare for iftar and so on. So this is the last question pertaining to the topic that we learned today. Salam Shaykh. It has been said that when someone is given status and power, it doesn't change them, but it actually reveals who they really are. How true is this, Shaykh? Do you have any advice if we are given a promotion at work and people are praising us, but we are actually worried of our own nerves and jealousy from others? What do you say when someone praises us at that moment? I know you said Alhamdulillah, attribute to something, but I think this is also another level of trying to understand how we go about it.
I think the last part of the question has kind of been addressed with the
Yeah.
discussion. But the first part is quite interesting, is does it corrupt you? Does status reveal who you really are? And I think it's a mixture of the two, because it gives you an opportunity when you get a promotion in work, for example, to question whether if you wanted the promotion and you've been pushing and pushing and pushing for it, and now you've got it, now you think you're better than everybody else, it will reveal your intention once you've got it. However, if you actually been sincere in your intention from the beginning, then when you get into that new situation, there'll be a degree of reluctance, and there'll be a desire for what was mentioned earlier, the khumul, of actually being hidden. That you're in a job and I remember being my first headship, or being like the first time I was in charge of a school, thinking, I really don't like this job. I'd rather just get back into the classroom. I had to spend a lot of time going, especially in America, because head teachers, they don't teach. School principal is a different kind of administrative role, and they just couldn't understand me going into a classroom. But in my first school, I actually was used to just saying, you want a break now? You go take a break, I'll take your class now. And I would just take people's classes just so it kept me. When the higher you raise in the ranks, so to speak, if you still want that khumul, that hidden, you want to be hidden, then you're probably sincere in your way of dealing with things. So it hasn't revealed, or maybe it has revealed you, but it's not to do with whether it's revealing or whether you've been corrupted by it. The thing is to try and aim to get that sincerity, which is, how do you get that feeling of not looking down on people, of wanting not to have this status, of wanting to just get away. Actually, I don't like this, this part of the job, and that's how you should approach it, inshallah. And we ask Allah to protect us from all the things that damage our hearts, inshallah.
Ameen. Thank you very much. Here with this, we have ended the Q&A for this session tonight. I apologize to all the viewers who sent the question, but I think we have limited time tonight. Inshallah, we work with Shaykh for other session to bring forward your question and he can answer, inshallah. I think right now, Shaykh.
One of the possibilities is that we dedicate a bit of time to catch up with questions and answers, and then rather go through the text, you just send me the questions in advance, and then I can try and address because I imagine the time. Inshallah, we can try that, inshallah.
Yeah, thank you, Shaykh, for that. You're always, mashallah, service to all of us. Allah bless you and preserve you.
I love you, man.
And You love you too, Shaykh. And I think, Alhamdulillah, look forward to your tafsir Quran, inshallah, Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday. We have put up the poster, Surah Waqiah, and I think it's a very important surah for all of us to learn in these pandemic times, inshallah. So we'll update more. Look out at our Facebook, Shaykh. Can you make the closing dua before we end this?
We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to take all of the evils from our hearts. اللهم اخرج من قلوبنا كل ذل كل حب الدنيا وكل محل.
Ameen.
اللهم اخرج
Ameen.
من قلوبنا كل قدر للدنيا كل محل في الخلق يميل بي إلى معصية ويحول بيني وبينك وبين محبتك
Amen.
إنك على كل شيء قدير. ربنا آتنا في
Amen.
الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. اللهم إنك عفو تحب العفو فاعف عنا. اللهم إنك عفو تحب العفو فاعف عنا.
Amen.
اللهم إنك عفو تحب العفو فاعف عنا يا كريم العفو. وصلى اللهم على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم تسليما.
Thank you, Shaykh, very much. Have a blessed iftar. May Allah preserve you and your family. We see you again next week, inshallah.
إن شاء الله تعالى.
Assalamu alaikum.
وعليكم السلام.
Alhamdulillah, everyone. That's it for tonight session with Abdul Aziz. Some of you had email us or message us the question, like Shaykh said. We will work it out to send the question to him, and we will find a way to address your question, to answer your question. A few things to take note. Tomorrow night we have an interesting panel discussion with the sisters on women's dilemma in Ramadan, which will be on 9 p.m. or 9:30 p.m. somewhere there. And also on Tuesday at the same 10 p.m. As usual, our Quranic class, not Quranic class, Tafsir Quran. So sorry, Tafsir Quran and Surah Yasin by Shaykh Ibrahim Nas, who will be taught by Imam Abdul 10 p.m. And then on Wednesday at 9:30, we have Ustad Amin Yusof with the title The Hearts of Quran. So inshallah, we will update more and more details as they come by this week and next week and until the end of Ramadan. So with this, I'd like to say thank you very much for your viewer. But before we end this, please take note of our few humanitarian projects in this Ramadan. We have free food for all. You can contribute any amount of money for giving the porridge to the unfortunate families in Singapore for their Ramadan, and also the hospital in Senegal. Check it out at our Facebook and Instagram, inshallah. With this, I say Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. May peace be upon you, and we see you again. Remember us in your dua.